Book of Heaven, Volume 29, Part 12, July 27th, 1931. The Great Evil of One Who Does Not Do the Divine Will. Most interesting example of Adam. My abandonment continues in the holy divine volition, and I comprehended the great good that my little soul felt in living at the mercy of a will so holy. It has such jealousy. It loves her so much. It takes charge of everything, even of the littlest things of this creature. So much so that it seems to say, "Nobody touch her, and woe to those who would dare to." So I was thinking, it loves me so much, and have I ever had the great misfortune of opposing a will so lovable and adorable? I strongly doubt, especially in this last period of my existence, in what I have gone through, that there haven't been some fractures between me and the divine will. And while my poor mind was gloomed by the sad doubt, my sweet Jesus, unable to bear seeing me anguished, all goodness told me, "My good daughter, courage! Banish from your mind any doubt and anguish, because these debilitate you, and cause you to break the flight toward that will that loves you so much. It is true that there have been reflections, fears, lacks of full abandonment, in such a way that you felt the weight of your will, as if it wanted to come out into the field to do its course, and it rendered you like a fussy little girl who fears everything, is afraid of everything, and so much that very often she cries. And I held you tightly in my arms to sustain you, and more than ever I watched over your will to keep it safe. Therefore, daughter, true fractures between my divine will and yours there have not been, and if, may this never be, it had been so, heaven forbid, my daughter, you would have incurred into the same misfortune of Adam. By how many preparations was his existence not preceded! Our love gave itself no respite to put out the most. Heavens and sun, flourishing garden, and many other things, all preparatory acts, as the outpouring of our works for love of this man. And in creating him, our divine life poured out into him, making itself permanent life of him, in such a way that he felt us inside as perennial life, and he felt us outside in our works, created for love of him. Our love was so great that it made itself revealer of our divine being in the interior of man, because it had established our permanent life in him, and revealer on the outside, in such a way that each created thing was a revelation of our love that it made to him. More so, since in creation both our life and all created things were given to man in a permanent way, not at intervals. A good that is today, yes, and tomorrow no, is a broken love, and the nature of our love does not adapt itself to an interrupted love. Our love is eternal, and never says enough. So, as Adam broke off with our divine will, he gambled away all creation, and also our life in him. The offense of withdrawing from our divine will is so great that we put aside all our preparations, the great good that we have put out, and we withdraw from man. And with us, the whole creation remains offended. So, as Adam formed the fracture with our will, the heavens, the stars, the sun were offended. The air that he breathed, the sea, the earth that he trod, all felt offended, because my divine will is like heartbeat and blood circulation of all created things. Therefore all felt the sorrow of the fracture with the human will, feeling themselves being touched in the heartbeat from which they received life and preservation. Now, if, may this never be, there had been a fracture of will between yours and mine, I would have put aside my many preparations made in your soul, my many graces that were poured, and I would have withdrawn, placing myself aside. If you continue to feel me, it is a sign that my will is there, firm in you, and yours is at its place. If you knew what it means not to do my divine will, the creature dares to prevent and to make die that motion that never ceases, and to give death to the holy acts which my divine will has established to perform in the creature. It wants to give divine life, and while it is about to give it, if the human will does not receive it, and is opposed, it makes itself knife to kill and suffocate this divine life in its soul. Not doing my will seems to be nothing, while it is all the evil of the creature. It is the greatest offense to our supreme majesty. Therefore be attentive, and let your abandonment in it be continuous. Fiat. August 3rd, 1931. Each act in the divine will forms the nourishment to make the divine life grow in the creature. The greatest gift that God gives. The truth. I am always there, in the center of the divine fiat, though under the nightmare of the privation of my sweet Jesus. Oh, how painful it is to feel, escaping from oneself, that Jesus who loves me and whom I love. And while he forms my life of strength, of love, of light, his life of love, of strength, and of light, escapes from within my life. Oh God, what pain to feel life while the true life is not there. What torture, what torment. Oh, how I feel like repeating, there is no sorrow similar to my sorrow. Heavens and earth cry with me, and all of you implore for me the return of that Jesus who loves me and whom I love. So I abandon myself more than ever in that divine fiat, which no one can take away from me, not even Jesus himself. If he hides, he makes some little escapes from me, but his divine will never leaves me. It is always with me, and my poor mind goes around everything that the divine fiat has done and does for love of us. And since I was thinking about its great love in creating us, my beloved Jesus, coming out from his hiding place, told me, "My daughter, the creation of man was the center in which our divinity centralized all the goods that were to arise in the creature. We placed in him divine life and divine will, human life and human will. The human life was to serve us as dwelling, and the two wills fused together were to live life in common, with highest accord. Even more, the human will was to take from ours in order to form its acts, and ours was to be in continuous act of giving of its own, so that the human will would remain modeled and fully molded in the divine will. Now, there is no life, whether human, spiritual, or divine, which does not need nourishment in order to grow, to be fortified, to be embellished, and to be happy. More so, since we placed our divine life in man, because he was incapable of receiving all the fullness of our divine being, we placed in him as much as he could contain of our life, giving him the freedom to make it grow as much as he could and wanted. Therefore, our life in man, in order to grow, had need of nourishment. Here is the necessity to place the divine will in him. Our divine life would not have adapted itself to nourishments of human will, and therefore all the acts of the creature, done by virtue of our divine will and in it, would serve to nourish and make grow our divine life in her, in such a way that, as she would gradually keep doing her acts in our fiat, now she would take our love and would nourish us, now she would take our strength, now our infinite sweetness, now our divine joys to nourish us. What order, what harmony we placed in creating man between him and us, to the extent of asking for our own nourishments through him, not because we needed it, no, but in order to maintain the ardor of love, the correspondence, the inseparable union between him and us. And while he would occupy himself with us, we would occupy ourselves with nourishing him, and with preserving our dear dwelling. Not only this, but giving him other more beautiful gifts to render him happier, love him more, and make ourselves be loved more. But do you want to know what our most beautiful gifts are, which we give to the creature? Manifesting to her a knowledge of our Supreme Being, a truth that belongs to us, a secret of ours, is the most beautiful gift that we give to her. Each of these gifts is one more bond that we place between her and us. Each truth of ours is a property that we place in her soul, and therefore, in the soul in whom our will reigns, we find our divine nourishments, our properties, for as much as is possible for creature, and our dwelling. So we find ourselves in our home, in our center, in the midst of our properties. See, then, what it means to let our will reign, and the great good of making our truths known to you. Each of our knowledges brings its own distinct gift. One brings its light, one the strength, one the goodness, one the wisdom, one the love, and so forth. Each of them binds the creature to God in a special way, and God to her. Therefore, know how to correspond to the many gifts that your Jesus has given you, and live always in our will. Fiat. August 10th, 1931. Ugliness of the human nature without the divine will. Beauty of one who lives in it. The smile of heaven upon the earth. My abandonment in the divine volition continues. I feel its enrapturing force, sweetly imposing itself on me, but without forcing me, because it does not like things that are forced. They are not for it. They are things that do not belong to it. Therefore, it is all eyes, so that all my acts may receive the life of the divine will, and become as if they were its own acts. And it seems to me that each of my acts, done in its adorable will, is a victory that it wins over the littleness of my will. So I was thinking to myself, how ugly the human nature is without the divine. And my sweet Jesus told me, my daughter, ugly is the human nature that lives without my will, because it was created by the Supreme Being to live united, together with the divine Fiat. So by living without it, a shift takes place in the human nature. In this shift, the order, the strength, the love, the light, the sanctity, the very reason, are shifted. All of these beautiful qualities are present in the creature, because they were placed by God as within a sacrarium. But they are present outside of their place, all in disorder. And since they are out of place, one is against the other. Passions fight sanctity. Weakness fights strength. Human love fights the divine, the creature, the creator, and so forth. The human nature without the divine will transforms itself into ugly. It turns upside down, and in its disorder, it wages war against its creator. It happens as with the soul and the body, which were created by God to live life together. If the body wanted to live separate life from the soul, would it not have the sad lot of undergoing such transformation as to no longer be recognized from what it was? As our divinity created man, our infinite wisdom concurred with it, which, as the artisan and the expert that possesses the whole science of the art of being able to create, in our all-seeingness saw that, in order for this man to be our honor, and a work worthy of our creative hands, and our glory and also his, he was to be formed as body and soul, and we gave charge to our will as primary life of the soul and of the body. So what the soul is to the body, our will was to be for both one and the other. Therefore the creature was created, and had in her beginning body, soul, human will, and divine will, all together, which were to live life in common, with highest accord. And our will, which held the primacy, was to make itself nourisher and preserver and dominator of this creature. So, if without our divine will the human nature is ugliness, united with ours, it is of a rare and enchanting beauty. In its creation, the seed of light was placed in it by us, and our Fiat, more than most tender mother, extends with its wings of light over this seed, and caresses it, delights it, kisses it, nourishes it, makes it grow, and communicates to it, with its heat and light, all the varieties of the divine beauties. And the human nature receives the participation, remains under the mighty and continuous influence of a strength, of a sanctity, of a love fully divine, and it grows beautiful, lovable, and admirable to all. Therefore the human nature, the way it was created by us, is not ugly, but beautiful, nor do we know how to do ugly things. But it can render itself ugly by not keeping to the ways in which it was created and wanted by us. See then how necessary it is that creatures do and live in our will, because it enters the first act of their creation. So once this is destroyed, she remains disfigured and without true life. All created things were created with two and even with three elements together. The sun possesses light and heat. If the light wanted to live isolated without heat, it would be sterile light, without fecundity. And if the heat wanted to isolate itself from the light, it would turn into darkness. And here it is, disfigured, the most beautiful sphere that forms the enchantment of the whole universe, and with its light dominates and does good to all. The earth is formed of the elements of earth and water. If the earth wanted to do without water, it would become dust, and would not form the solid pavement on which man could raise buildings and walk with firm step. Everything would vacillate under his feet. But this is not enough. If the earth did not want to receive the seed into its bosom, it would not form the beautiful flowerings, the abundance of fruits. So earth, water, and seed must live together. One must be life of the other. They must remain united together in the way in which they had the beginning of their creation. Otherwise, the earth would strike terror, and would remain without the life of the good assigned to it by God, which it was to do to creatures. All things were not created as isolated, and all the good is in their maintaining themselves as they were created by God. And then, also with sciences, if a person wanted to learn how to read, and did not want to learn the vowels, and then the union of the consonants, which are the beginning, the foundation, the substance from which the sciences derive, could he ever learn how to read? Never. He could drive himself crazy on the books, but as for learning, never. See then the strict necessity of sticking to the way in which things were formed at the beginning of their existence, if they do not want to turn from beautiful into ugly, from good into evil, from life into death. Now, what good can the creature hope for, if she does not live united with our divine will, in which the beginning of her creation was established? Oh, if all would comprehend this, how attentive they would be to let themselves be dominated, nourished, raised by my will, which, being the beginning of their existence, would form in them all that is beautiful, good, and holy, and the great fortune of life down here, and then the great glory of their life up there. After this, I continued my acts in the divine will, and it seemed to me that these acts done in it had the virtue of uniting heaven and earth, and of drawing all the celestial inhabitants to look at the creature that was letting herself be invested by the divine volition, to give it the field of action in her acts. And my sweet Jesus added, "My daughter, there is nothing more beautiful, holier, more gracious, and that possesses an enrapturing force and virtue, than a soul who lets herself be dominated by my divine will. She is the smile of heaven and of the earth. Each act of hers forms a rapture for her Creator, who feels the sweet force of his will in the creature, and sweetly lets himself be enraptured. And all the blessed feel that from the earth there is someone who enraptures the will of heaven, to make it her own, and to live in common with them. Oh, how they feel twice as happy in seeing that also on earth reigns that Fiat, which, while it beatifies them and forms their supreme happiness, reigns at one point of the earth, operating and triumphant. Therefore, at that point of the earth appears a nimbus of heaven, a divine will operating, a smile of the celestial fatherland, which draws the attention of the whole of heaven on that point, to keep it defended, and to enjoy that smile which the divine will forms in that creature. In fact, the saints are inseparable from all the acts of it, and they enjoy and take part in them according to their merits. More so, since the acts done in my divine will are as many chains of love that flow between heaven and earth, and they love all without putting any one aside. And because she loves all, she is well liked by all. Therefore, my daughter, be attentive. Fly, run always in my divine will, that you may form the smile of heaven upon earth. It is beautiful to see heaven smile, but since happiness and the smile are its own properties, it is the earth that renders itself more beautiful, more attractive, for the celestial smile that my divine will forms in the creature is not a property of its own. Fiat. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 29, Part 12. Fiat.